You want to know if an avoidant is deeply in love with you? Don't look for grand gestures. Don't expect a poetic confession under candlelight. That's not how they operate. For an avoidant, love doesn't arrive wrapped in romance. It shows up in the quiet moments where they do something they've never allowed themselves to do before. It shows up when they start breaking their own rules. You've got to understand something critical about avoidance. Their entire nervous system is trained for self-preservation. Their emotional blueprint is built around control, predictability, and space. They've survived life by keeping people at a distance. So when they do something that violates their own comfort zone, something that opens them up to risk, to intimacy, to being known, that is massive. That is love. Maybe you notice it when they linger after an argument instead of walking away like they usually do. Maybe they send that second text when one would have sufficed. Or maybe they sit through an uncomfortable emotional conversation and don't shut down or escape into silence. It may seem small to you, but for them, those are internal rebellions. That's them challenging the very identity that's kept them safe all their life. Avoidants don't fall in love. They resist it. Every instinct in their mind tells them, this is dangerous, don't trust this, don't get close. So when they start doing the opposite of what their survival program is screaming at them, that's not weakness, that's transcendence. That's transformation fueled by connection. They're not just making time for you, they're undoing decades of emotional armor just to be near you. Psychologically, this is called cognitive dissonance. They're doing things that conflict with their core identity, and yet they do it anyway. Why? Because love is stronger than fear, but only when it's real, only when it's deep. And avoidant love is in constant tension. One foot on the gas, one foot on the brake. But when they start pressing forward more than they retreat, you're not imagining it, that's emotional courage. That's commitment, even if it looks messy. Now don't get it twisted. This isn't going to be smooth. You're not going to get consistency right away. Love from an avoidant doesn't show up in a straight line. It zigzags, it hides, it flares up and disappears. But if you pay attention, you'll see a pattern. They start bending their boundaries in ways they never have for anyone else. They initiate, they compromise, they return after pulling away. That's not indecision, that's warfare inside their heart. A war between what's safe and what's sacred. What's powerful here, and you've got to catch this, is that they often don't know why they're doing it. They can't explain it. They'll even act irritated by their own vulnerability. But it's happening. That's the subconscious override of love. It's bypassing their rational mind and forcing them to evolve. That's why it's so important not to judge them by traditional standards. You can't measure their love by how comfortable they are with intimacy. You have to measure it by how uncomfortable they're willing to become just to keep you close. You see, most people love in the direction of comfort. Avoidants love against the grain of everything they've been taught. That makes their love rare. That makes it expensive. It costs them. So when you see them breaking their rules, not once, but consistently, even if imperfectly, you're witnessing a person fall in love the only way they know how. Not loudly, not easily, but honestly. You don't need a fairy tale ending to know it's real. You just need to witness the struggle, the sacrifice of safety for the sake of connection. That's where the truth lives. And if you're the one person who can see that, you're not just being loved, you're being trusted. And for an avoidant, that's the highest form of devotion there is. If they're breaking their patterns, they're breaking their fear. And if they're breaking their fear, it's because you broke through. If you really want to understand whether an avoidant is in love with you, don't look at their words, look at their presence. Look at the moments where instead of running for emotional cover like they usually do, they stay. And not just physically, I'm talking about emotionally staying present when everything in them wants to shut down, back off, or disappear. You see, for avoidance, presence is not natural. It's not their default. Presence demands vulnerability. It demands confrontation with feelings they've spent years, even decades, learning to avoid. To them, closeness feels like danger, so their go-to reaction is to protect, to create distance, to detach, to intellectualize, to avoid. But here's the paradox. When an avoidant begins to fall deeply in love, something begins to shift inside them, a shift so subtle, most people miss it. They start choosing connection over safety. They start choosing you over the emotional wall they've lived behind. Now, let's be clear. This is not a romantic movie moment. There's no soundtrack, no big gesture. It's quiet. It's subtle. Maybe it's the moment they sit beside you in your grief without needing to fix anything. Maybe it's the moment they listen without defensiveness, or when they open up just a little when you can feel their voice shaking. Maybe it's the simple fact that they didn't walk away when they had every excuse to. What you're witnessing in that moment is monumental, because for an avoidance, presence is pain. It means allowing themselves to be seen, and being seen, for someone who's trained their entire being to hide, is terrifying. Their nervous system reacts like it's under threat. So if they stay in the conversation, in the disagreement, in the discomfort, that's not small. That's an act of emotional courage that often costs them more than you realize. But you have to understand, love for an avoidant is a choice against instinct. Their instinct is to self-protect, to keep space between them and anything that could trigger vulnerability. But when love becomes real, when it starts to penetrate their armor, they find themselves pulled in by a force stronger than fear. They start showing up differently, not because they know how, but because the connection compels them to try. Now, here's the kicker. They won't always do it well. They might look distant even when they're trying their hardest to stay present. That's because their emotional muscles are underdeveloped. They're learning intimacy the way someone learns a new language, awkwardly, hesitantly, and often full of doubt. But that's what makes it so powerful. When they choose presence over protection, they're not just showing you love, they're becoming someone new. They're evolving. And that's where the real gold is. Because what's more beautiful than someone choosing growth for the sake of connection? Not changing for you, that's dependency, but changing because they've encountered something in you that made their old patterns too small to live in. That's the transformation love was always meant to create. From a psychological standpoint, this is where attachment patterns begin to shift. Avoidants are typically dismissive because intimacy feels threatening. But with consistent safety and genuine connection, they can begin to rewire their emotional responses. You become what therapists call a corrective emotional experience, a relationship that contradicts the old wound. And that contradiction over time can become healing. But don't romanticize this either. It's not your job to fix them. It's your responsibility to recognize the signs and decide if you're emotionally safe enough, strong enough to walk through that fire with them. Because presence over protection doesn't mean perfection, it means effort. And if you can see that effort, even when it's clumsy, even when it's slow, you're witnessing the earliest, most sacred form of love an avoidant can give. So the next time they don't walk away, when they lean in instead of pulling back, when they sit with you instead of shutting down, understand this: they are risking their identity for the possibility of intimacy. And they wouldn't do that for just anyone. When they choose presence over protection, it means they've already decided you're worth the risk. One of the most overlooked but revealing signs that an avoidant is deeply in love with you is this: they start mirroring your emotional state, not just observing it. And that's a massive shift, because avoidants are not naturally wired for emotional attunement. They usually live in their heads, not their hearts. They've learned to analyze feelings rather than feel them. So when you start noticing that they're feeling with you instead of simply watching you from a distance, pay attention. That's not behavior, that's transformation. Here's the truth. Avoidants aren't incapable of empathy. They're just terrified of what it means to join someone emotionally. See, empathy is dangerous for someone who has built a life on emotional detachment. Because the moment they start feeling what you feel, they risk losing control, and control is the one thing they've used to survive. Emotional mirroring for them is like standing on the edge of a cliff with no harm. But if they do it, if they actually lean into your emotional reality, that's love breaking through. And I'm not talking about dramatic displays here. I mean the subtle shifts. You cry and they don't flinch, they soften. You're anxious and they slow down. You're joyful and they actually reflect it back. They begin to match your tempo. That's not performance, that's resonance. It means their emotional wall is beginning to thin. And more importantly, it means they're letting your emotional experience enter them, which is something they normally resist with everything they've got. Psychologically, this is the beginning of emotional co-regulation, two nervous systems syncing. It's a primitive, unconscious process. You're not asking for it, and they're not trying. It just happens. And when it happens with an avoidant, it means something in them is letting go. Letting go of control, letting go of the need to remain separate. That's not weakness, that's intimacy. That's the raw soil where real connection is built. Now, most avoidants are highly self-contained. They don't let anyone disrupt their emotional stability. They fear being consumed by another person's needs or feelings. So when they begin to mirror you, it means they're no longer prioritizing their emotional safety above all else. It means they're letting your presence move them. And to someone who spent years numbing, that movement is terrifying, but also freeing. Because in that mirroring, they're not just seeing you, they're finding themselves. You want to know what real love looks like from an avoidant? It's when they stop managing your emotions from a distance and start feeling them with you. They begin to respond in sync, even when words fail. That's their soul learning a new language. And it's not the language of logic or defense. It's the language of connection. And they're not fluent, not even close, but the effort to mirror you is the clearest sign they're learning, not because they have to, but because something inside them says, this person matters enough to feel with. Think about that. For someone who spent their life building walls, the decision to resonate with another human being, to let your feelings affect their inner world, is a form of surrender. It's unspoken, but it's profound. And the irony, that emotional mirroring will often come before verbal affection. They may not say, I love you, but you'll feel it in the way their nervous system begins to dance with yours. And in a world where most people say too much and feel too little, that kind of resonance is sacred. So don't miss it. Don't overlook the small signs. The subtle matching of tone, timing, energy. The softening of their defenses in your presence. The way they begin to anticipate your feelings before you express them. That's not luck. That's the slow emergence of someone learning to love from a place of emotional truth, not performance. When they mirror your emotions, they're no longer standing outside your world, they're stepping into it. And for someone who built their life avoiding connection, that's not just love, that's freedom. There's one moment in a relationship with an avoidant that changes everything. It's when they open the door to their private world. And I'm not just talking about their schedule, their habits, or their favorite band. I'm talking about their interior life, the place they rarely, if ever, let anyone enter. That guarded inner space filled with memories, meanings, routines, and pain. If they start giving you access to that world, even just a glimpse, that's not politeness, that's not comfort, that's intimacy. And for an avoidant, it's one of the clearest, most powerful signs they're in love. So you have to understand, avoidants don't do transparency easily. Vulnerability to them is exposure, and exposure equals risk. Their emotional survival system has been built around privacy, isolation, and self-regulation. They believe that the more someone knows them, the more they can be hurt. So what do? They keep things compartmentalized. Even in relationships, they'll often only show you the version of themselves that feels safe, curated, controlled, and most people mistake that for coldness or disinterest. But it's not. It's fear, mastered and disguised. So what does it mean when they start opening up that hidden world? When they share something personal, a childhood story, a scar they never show, a pattern they've never explained, a place they go to think, it's not casual. That's sacred space. And if you're standing in it, it means they trust you with the most protected part of their identity. They're not just connecting with you, they're inviting you into their world. That's their love language. Quiet, hesitant, but profoundly real. And this goes beyond verbal disclosure. Sometimes they'll invite you into their routines, into their solitude, into the silence they usually reserve for themselves. Maybe they start taking you to the places they go when they need peace. A certain coffee shop, a walk they always do alone, the playlist they only use when they're hurting. These are not random invitations. These are emotional landmarks, and when they start including you in them, it means they no longer see themselves as one, they're beginning to see themselves as part of something. That's a huge psychological leap for an avoidant, because for most of their lives, they've believed that being on their own is the only way to stay safe. Independence isn't just a trait for them, it's an emotional survival mechanism. But love starts to challenge that belief. And here's what's really happening underneath. When they start letting you in, It's not because they suddenly feel safe, it's because they've decided you're worth the risk. Now, they may not be able to explain this. Don't expect a clear speech or an emotional announcement. This kind of access is subtle. It's in the way they let you see them when they're unguarded, when they're quiet, when they're not performing, when they show you the mess, not just the mask. And that access is earned, not demanded, not manipulated, not forced, earned through consistency, through presence, through the absence of pressure. This is where you've got to be emotionally intelligent enough to recognize the difference between distance and depth. An avoidant might not shower you with affection, but if they're giving you entry into their private reality, you're not just another person. You're not temporary. You're becoming someone who matters because you're breaking the very pattern that kept them emotionally protected for so long. You see, love doesn't look the same for everyone. For an avoidant, love is giving what they never give, letting someone see what they never show. That's real intimacy. That's real connection. It's the slow unlocking of a life once kept sealed. And they won't do it for just anyone. Because once they open that door, they know they can't shut it without consequence. So if you're inside, you're not just in their life, you're in their trust. When they offer you access to their private world, they're not just letting you in, they're laying down their armor. And that kind of vulnerability isn't weakness. It's love in its most courageous form. There's something powerful that most people completely miss when it comes to avoidance. They show love through consistency, not necessarily through grand romantic gestures. It's not fireworks with them. It's not dramatic proclamations or love letters or emotional meltdowns. No, it's a quiet, persistent showing up. It's in the routines they maintain with you. It's in the way they keep making space for you in their structured world. And when you understand how hard that actually is for an avoidant, you begin to see just how loud their silence really is. You see, avoidants don't like emotional unpredictability. In fact, they're wired to shut down when things get chaotic. Their inner world thrives on routine, predictability, and emotional detachment because those things give them a sense of control. So when someone enters their life, someone who stirs up feelings they've buried, someone who activates needs they've learned to suppress, their immediate instinct is to retreat. But if they don't, if instead they stay and they keep showing up in your life in small but regular ways, that's not just them being present, that's love. Disciplined, intentional, terrified love. Think about this. For an avoidant, consistency with another human being is a radical act. It goes directly against their pattern of pushing away, of isolating, of emotionally self-soothing without anyone else in the picture. And yet, when they care, they begin to repattern slowly, awkwardly, imperfectly. They begin to create emotional rituals that include you. They might not say, I love you, but they'll send the same check-in text every morning. They might not open up easily, but they'll make sure they're available when you need help. They'll carve out time. And trust me, for an avoidant, time is control, and give that time to you. What makes this so significant is that for avoidance, repetition is safety. Routine is how they manage the world. So if they start inserting you into that rhythm, it means they're trying to build a version of life where you belong. You become part of the pattern, not a disruption to it. And once they allow you into that space, they begin to depend on your presence in ways they won't even fully admit to themselves. That's not codependency. That's emotional integration. But here's the catch. Because it's not flashy, most people overlook it. They assume that the lack of intensity means a lack of depth. But the truth is, many avoidants love deeply, they just express it differently. Their love is not loud, it's loyal, it's structured, it's resilient. It looks like the person who doesn't bolt after a hard conversation. It looks like someone who keeps the promises they made even when their emotions are all over the place. And it's not impulsive love. It's mature love, intentional love. And in many cases, it's more powerful than all the drama and chaos people often confuse with passion. And if you're wise, emotionally attuned, you'll see it. You'll recognize that when an avoidant shows up for you day after day, when they make you a fixture in their life, they're not just tolerating your presence. They're learning how to need it carefully, subconsciously, willfully. And for someone whose core defense mechanism is not needing anyone, that's a revolutionary change. Consistency for an avoidant is the ultimate contradiction. It's choosing closeness even when distance feels safer. It's opting into a pattern that includes emotional accountability, and trust me, they feel it. Every single time they show up for you, they are battling old programming. They are going against the grain of everything their nervous system tells them to do. So when they keep showing up, it's not just behavior, it's reconstruction. It's emotional bravery in action. So don't look for sparks. Don't wait for dramatic declarations. Look for the person who is trying, the one who keeps showing up, the one who may not know how to love the way you expect, but is doing everything in their power to love you the only way they know how, with consistency, stability, and presence. When an avoidant makes you part of their routine, they're not just making time, they're making a commitment. And in the world of avoidance, that is love in its most grounded, powerful form. There is one signal from an avoidant that is so subtle, most people miss it entirely, and yet it speaks louder than any words ever could. It's when they stay present through your emotional storms. Not fix you, not flee, just stay. For someone who built their identity around emotional self-protection, that stillness in the face of your chaos is a radical act of love. Let's break this down. Avoidants aren't just emotionally distant, they're emotionally guarded. Their nervous system is hypersensitive to intensity, conflict, vulnerability. Why? Because somewhere deep in their story, closeness equaled threat. Love meant conditions. Affection came with expectations. So they learned to retreat mentally, emotionally, sometimes physically, to preserve themselves. And it worked. Until someone like you came into their life and cracked open the door to something deeper. Now here's where it gets real. When you break down, when you cry, spiral, question everything, a typical avoidant response is to shut down or disappear. Not because they don't care, but because they don't know what to do with that level of emotional exposure. Their brain screams, run, this is danger. But if they don't run, if they sit with you, if they allow themselves to be in your presence while you're unraveling, that is their love. That is their attachment system rewiring itself in real time. And notice I didn't say they jump in to comfort you or offer grand emotional support. That might still be out of reach for them, but they're there, grounded, holding space, not interrupting, not silencing, not fixing, just witnessing your humanity without retreating into their usual shell. That's a deeper form of connection than most people realize, because for an avoidant, staying is harder than leaving. Emotional presence is the real test. And if they pass it, if they start becoming someone who can hold emotional space, not just for themselves, but for you, it means they're evolving from survival mode to relational mode. And it's not just about support. It's about reliability. It's about becoming someone who can be trusted with emotional weight, not just lightness. When an avoidant begins to anchor themselves through your emotions, they are developing a new kind of strength. Not the strength of avoidance, but the strength of stability. They're learning how to be the calm, not the escape. And let me tell you, that is love forged in fire. There's a philosophical beauty in this kind of presence. It's the idea that love isn't about solving the other person, it's about being with them, standing in their emotional rain without trying to dry them off. That's intimacy. And avoidance, for all their distancing tendencies, are capable of incredible intimacy once they feel safe enough to choose presence over protection. You might even notice a moment when you're expecting them to disappear, you're bracing for silence, expecting withdrawal, and instead they do something small but seismic. They stay, they check in, they don't leave. That moment isn't small. That moment is the rewiring of an entire internal system that's been running on fear for years. And you were the catalyst. Understand, for most avoidants, presence is love. Their love isn't loud, but it's loyal. It doesn't scream affection, it sustains it. So when they stand by you during your worst, not because they know what to say, but because they refuse to abandon you, that's not weakness. That's the highest expression of love they've ever learned to give. And if you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. You'll think they're just being quiet. You'll wonder why they don't comfort you the way others might. But what you don't see is the internal battle they're winning every time they resist the urge to run. Every time they allow themselves to stay human in the presence of another human breaking down, they're choosing love over fear, connection, growth over habit. When an avoidant stays with you through your storm, they're not just present, they're transforming. And in that quiet presence lies a louder love than most people will ever hear.